The last time I stood in my parents' house, it still smelled like lemon polish and old furnace air. Mom used to wipe down the baseboards every Saturday, no matter how brittle her hands had become. She said dust made a house look unloved. She'd been gone 4 days. Her funeral was small, just close family, and one neighbor who brought over a lemon pound cake no one touched. I stayed at a local inn 2 miles from the house I grew up in. I hadn't asked to stay with my family. I hadn't been invited. That morning, I came by to help sort through Mom's things. My father, George Thompson, was seated in his usual recliner, reading a flyer for window replacements he'd never buy. He nodded at me but didn't speak. My sister, Laura Miller, now since marrying Tom, was already in Mom's bedroom, arms elbow-deep in drawers. She had a blue purse, Laura said without turning. You know the one. She always kept it under the dresser. It's gone. I didn't answer. I remembered that purse. Navy leather, soft with age. Mom used to clutch it close like it held something irreplaceable, though she never said what was inside. George spoke next without looking up. You had the key to the back door last month when you came to take her to the eye doctor. I gave it back before I left, I said quietly. Laura straightened, face unreadable. She trusted you with it. That's fine. But we're just saying if you came by after the funeral home took her and something happened to it, it's okay to say so now. I looked from her to Dad. He closed the pamphlet. I'm not accusing. He said, his voice flat, but she kept some of her jewelry in there, sentimental things. She didn't wear much near the end, but she told your sister she'd put them away for safekeeping. Something in me pulled taut. I opened my mouth, then closed it. Laura folded her arms. I mean, it's just us. No police. We just want it back. There was silence. The kind that thickens in old houses where nothing moves unless someone forces it. I didn't take it, I said. George nodded slowly as if I'd confirmed what he feared or what he expected. Well, he said, clearing his throat, if it turns up, just bring it back. And maybe take a break from coming around. Laura added her voice tighter. We all need space. I looked at them both, two people who shared my blood, but not my doubt. The blue purse wasn't the only thing that had disappeared from that house. I left without another word. The next morning, I returned to the house. I didn't want to, but I had to. I'd promised Mom I would help sort the photo boxes, the ones she kept labeled by year, even as her memory began fraying at the edges. George was already at the kitchen table when I walked in, sipping coffee from a chipped mug with the Chicago Cubs logo. His robe was open over a flannel shirt, mismatched socks on his feet. Sit, he said without looking up. I did. Laura came in a few minutes later carrying a yellow notepad and a Ziploc bag of receipts. She didn't greet me, just pulled out the chair across from mine and set her things down like she was preparing for a deposition. George cleared his throat. We talked last night. Your sister's been doing some checking. Laura nodded. Mom told me a few weeks before she passed that she was putting her valuables in the blue purse. She even mentioned some savings bonds. I blinked. Savings bonds. She didn't want them lying around, Laura went on. She said she felt safer keeping everything together, and the last person she saw alone was you? George folded his hands. We're not trying to make this ugly, but there's no sign of forced entry. No one else had the key. The house was locked. I said nothing. It wouldn't matter. Laura leaned forward, her voice soft but sharp. This isn't just about a purse. It's about trust. You weren't here when Mom's hip broke. You weren't here when she couldn't remember how to dial 911. I was. I sent money, I said. Money doesn't sit by someone's bedside at 3 a.m. when they don't know where they are. Laura replied, eyes still on me. You weren't here, but now that Mom's gone here, you are showing up just in time to sort through her things. She let that sentence hang like it was the conclusion I should have drawn for myself. My hands were still on the table, palms down. I could feel the wood grain pressing faintly into my skin. I don't want her arrested, Laura said, turning to George. But if she has the purse, we deserve to know. I looked at my father. His gaze met mine, but it didn't soften. We're not filing anything legal, but I agree. Bring it back if you took it. And it's probably best you leave afterward. It landed quiet. Not cruel. Not loud. Just final. I pushed back my chair and stood. You think I stole from her? You're the only one who had access, Laura said. What else are we supposed to think? I opened my mouth. Closed it, then nodded. All right. Laura blinked. So I don't have it, I said. She frowned. Then why? I said I don't have it, I repeated. But I understand what you've decided. I turned toward the hallway, toward the front door I used to race through after school. Laura's voice followed me. We don't want drama, Sienna. We just want the truth. I paused at the coat rack. That's what I want too, I said. I'm sorry you don't recognize it. I didn't cry on the drive back to the motel. I kept the radio off and my eyes on the road like that could keep the rest of me from unraveling. The room was cold. The wall heater made more noise than heat. I set my purse down, kicked off my shoes, and sat on the edge of the bed. For a while, I just stared at the floral comforter. It looked like something my mother would have picked out 20 years ago. I opened my suitcase, unzipped the inner pocket, and pulled out a small padded envelope. Inside was a flash drive and a faded receipt from Best Buy. The date was 7 weeks ago. Underneath it was a folded note in my mother's handwriting, slanted careful, a little shaky near the end. In case I forget where I put things again. Thank you for helping me feel safe, Mom. She hadn't wanted to install a camera at first. Said it felt like spying, but the day I found her looking for her wedding ring in the freezer, she changed her mind. I'm starting to misplace things, she told me that afternoon. Or maybe someone else is moving them. I don't know anymore, but I want to know. I need to. So I bought a small indoor cam no bigger than a salt shaker. I set it on the top shelf of her bedroom hutch, angled toward the vanity and dresser. It blended in with her porcelain knickknacks. She smiled when I showed her the app, just in case she'd said. Now in that motel room with the low humming heater, I plugged the flash drive into my laptop and opened the footage folder. Each file was time-stamped. I scrolled to the day after Mom passed. The day Laura said she came by just to sit in Mom's room one last time. I clicked. There she was. Laura dressed in a gray sweater, her hair pulled back, moving quickly like she had a list in her head. She opened drawers, pulled open the bottom dresser cabinet. Paused. Then she lifted the blue purse. She didn't hesitate, just unzipped it. Glanced inside and tucked it into the large tote bag on her shoulder. A few seconds later, George appeared in the doorway. He stopped. Looked at Laura. Looked at the bag. He said nothing, didn't step forward, just watched for a second, then walked away. I watched the clip twice, and then I sat there, laptop warm on my legs, my mother's note still resting beside me. They hadn't just accused me. They had known exactly who took it. The next day, I didn't knock. The front door creaked the way it always had. The smell of brewed coffee and old carpet hit me like a childhood memory I never asked for. George was in his recliner again, a different mug in hand. This one said, "Never won, Grandpa," though he never used the title out loud. Laura was standing by the dining table, sorting envelopes into piles. She looked up. Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't speak. I walked in quietly, holding the laptop under one arm, a black cord trailing from my pocket like a thin leash. George lowered his cup. "You're back. I won't stay long," I said. I set the laptop down on the dining table. Same one where we used to carve pumpkins as kids. Same one where Mom once burned a hole in the tablecloth with a candle but pretended it had always been there. Laura crossed her arms. "You came to confess," I opened the laptop. The screen blinked to life. "No, I said I came to show you something." I clicked the file, maximized the video, and stepped back. No introductions, no narration. Laura's voice cracked first. "What is this?" George leaned forward. The glow of the screen lit the deep lines under his eyes. He squinted, then stiffened. There it was in crisp, silent grayscale. Laura entering the bedroom, opening drawers, finding the purse, taking it. Then George appearing, pausing, watching and walking away. The video ended. The screen went black. The room didn't. Laura's arms dropped to her sides. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. She looked at George, then at me. "I could have it," Laura said at last. Her voice was unsteady, like she couldn't decide whether to cry or explain. "Back in the spring, when I took her to the doctor, she said she didn't want you to have it." George didn't move. His face was unreadable. Laura took a breath. "I didn't steal it. I assumed Mom told you." I stared at her. She didn't. George spoke then, low and slow. "You had no right to film us." I turned to him. She asked me to. His brow furrowed. She said she was starting to forget things. She wanted help remembering. She didn't want anyone, including herself, to misplace something and not know what happened. That camera was for her peace of mind. Laura shook her head. "You waited to show this. You let us walk right into it." "No, I said you ran into it. I just pressed play." She flinched like the words landed too close. George set his mug down carefully. "What do you want, Sienna? You got your little reveal. So what now?" I looked at him, then at her. "Nothing," I said. "I'm not here to get even." Laura exhaled a bitter laugh. "Then why come at all?" "Because you accused me. Because you made me stand in the house where I grew up and call me a thief in front of the man who taught me to respect people's things. Because you wanted the truth until it wasn't convenient." I closed the laptop. The sound of the lid snapping shut was louder than I expected. George leaned back. "Well, I guess it's all out now." I slid the laptop back into its sleeve. "No, not all of it." Laura narrowed her eyes. "What else is there?" I met her stare. "I'm not the one who should be asking that." Then I turned, walked toward the door, and left them in the silence they'd built together. 2 days passed. I didn't hear from either of them. I stayed in the motel, packed but unmoved. The suitcase sat zipped at the foot of the bed. I hadn't booked my flight yet, not because I was waiting, but because I was finally in no hurry to go where no one expected me. On the third morning, I walked to the post office and mailed a small padded envelope. No return address, just 2 names typed in stiff font on the label: Laura Miller, George Thompson. Inside, I placed 3 things. First, a copy of Mom's note, the one she wrote in crooked cursive asking for the camera. Second, a photo I'd printed at the drugstore across from the motel. An image pulled from the video, frozen on the moment Laura held the purse open and looked inside. And third, a small handwritten line in my own hand. This was never about the purse. I kept the original note to myself because it wasn't just a request for help. It was trust given quietly, the kind that didn't need an audience. In the last weeks of her life, Mom didn't write many things down. But one morning before I left town, she'd handed me that folded scrap and said, "Keep this just in case someone ever doubts you were there for me." I had almost forgotten it was in my wallet. Later that evening, I checked my email. A single message waited from Laura. No subject line, just a sentence short and sour. "You win. Enjoy what's left." There was no follow-up, no apology, no denial, and no response from George. Not even silence with weight, just absence, flat and familiar. I didn't reply. Some things don't deserve an answer. 6 months later, I flew back to Colorado just for a day. The cemetery sat on a small hill above the main road where traffic sounded like wind passing through trees. I hadn't been back since the funeral. No one met me there. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. The grass had grown in around the new headstone. Elizabeth Beth Thompson, beloved mother. Quiet strength. 1941 to 2023. I knelt beside her grave and placed a small bouquet of yellow freesia on the stone. Mom never liked roses, said they came with too much performance. From my coat pocket, I pulled out the flash drive. I'd wrapped it in soft cloth the way she used to wrap the Christmas ornaments that meant something. I set it gently at the base of the headstone. No box, no note, just the thing itself, quiet, still containing everything they didn't want to see. "You were right to be afraid," I said aloud. My voice didn't carry. It didn't need to. A few rows away, the plot next to hers was already marked. Reserved, George Thompson. The space was there, etched in stone, waiting for someone who'd never looked back once. I stood for a while, not in grief, but in gravity. There was nothing to forgive and no one left to ask for it. When I turned to leave, the sun was just starting to sink behind the row of pine trees at the edge of the cemetery. I didn't stop by the house. I didn't need to. Back home in Nevada, I opened the laptop one last time. Not out of anger. Not even out of sadness, just a kind of unfinished ache that needed closing like a drawer left open too long. The file folder was still there. I clicked through the recordings until I found a clip I hadn't watched before, dated 3 days before Mom died. The camera caught her at her vanity. Morning light from the window. She was brushing her hair, slow rhythmic, like the motion itself helped her remember who she was. She didn't know the camera was recording audio that day, but then she looked toward it, not directly at it, but near enough. And softly, like she was speaking to someone invisible, she said, "Sienna, I hope this camera makes you feel better too. I'm sorry your sister makes you feel small. You were always the one who saw me." She kept brushing as if nothing had happened. I sat still for a long time. Then I closed the laptop carefully this time. I didn't press play to prove a point. I pressed it to survive. Sometimes it's not the accusation that hurts most. It's realizing how quickly the people who raised you can believe it. They don't ask what happened. They don't remember what you've done. They just look at you like a stranger who walked in too quietly. And even when the truth shows up, undeniable timestamp silent as a video, still they don't apologize. They just look away. Not because they didn't know, but because deep down they did. Maybe that's what survival looks like for some of us. Not justice, not reunion. Just finally seeing it clearly and choosing not to stay in the room when the silence starts. I don't know if you've ever been called a thief in your own home. I don't know if you've ever held a letter that proved someone once trusted you more than they could say out loud. But if you've ever left quietly and knew that was the real ending, just leave a dot. That's all. Just a single period. I'll know what it means. Sienna learns a profound lesson about trust, truth, and the cost of familial bonds in the face of betrayal. The accusation of stealing her mother's purse leveled by her father George and sister Laura reveals how quickly those closest to her can assume the worst, despite her unwavering support for her mother in her final days. The discovery of the camera footage showing Laura taking the purse while George silently acquiesces exposes their complicity and shatters Sienna's belief in their shared family values. Her mother's note and final words, captured unknowingly on the camera, affirm Sienna's role as the one who truly saw and cared for her, offering a quiet validation that outweighs the accusations. This experience teaches Sienna that truth, while undeniable, does not always mend broken relationships or prompt apologies from those who cling to their narratives. Instead, it empowers her to walk away from a toxic dynamic, choosing self-respect over futile reconciliation. The act of leaving the flash drive at her mother's grave symbolizes her release from the need for their acknowledgement, embracing closure on her own terms. Sienna's journey underscores that survival sometimes means recognizing the limits of family ties and finding strength in the quiet trust of those who truly see you, even when they're gone. Her lesson is not about vengeance or proving a point, but about understanding that some truths are too heavy for others to carry. And walking away from that weight is an act of resilience. This clarity allows her to redefine her sense of home not as a place of shared blood, but as a space where her integrity remains intact, unburdened by the silence of those who choose not to see her.
The airport's departure board flickered mockingly as I stared at the list of flights, my carry-on bag heavy on my shoulder. No flights to Honolulu at 10 a.m. No flights to Hawaii at all this morning. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone to check the email from Mom one more time. Flights at 10 a.m. sharp on Thursday, honey. Don't be late like usual. But today was Thursday and there was no flight. A sick feeling crept into my stomach as I dialed Mom's number. Hello. The sound of waves crashed in the background. Olivia? Shouldn't you be at work? Mom, where are you? We're in Honolulu, of course. Her laugh tinkled like broken glass. The flight was yesterday, dear. Didn't you check your ticket? The ticket she'd never actually sent me. The ticket I'd been promised for this family vacation. The first since Grandpa died 3 months ago. Yesterday? My voice sounded distant to my own ears. But your email said. Oh, that old thing. I must have gotten the date wrong. You know how scattered I can be. Another laugh, this one joined by my sister Katie's distinctive giggle in the background. Though honestly, Olivia, it's probably for the best. You need to focus on finding a real job, not wasting time on vacation. That silly art career of yours isn't going anywhere. I closed my eyes, remembering the argument 3 weeks ago when I'd quit my corporate job to pursue art full-time. The job Dad had arranged through his golf buddies, the one that was supposed to be my sensible future. Did everyone else know? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Dad? Katie? Don't be dramatic, honey. We just thought. Well, with Grandpa's inheritance situation, maybe it's better if you start being more practical. Speaking of which, have you reconsidered Mr. Peterson's job offer? Mr. Peterson, Dad's friend who'd offered me an entry-level accounting position. The same position I'd turned down to focus on my painting, my waste of time as Mom called it. I have to go, I said, cutting off her practice speech about practical careers and responsible choices. Don't be like that, Olivia. We're just looking out for you. Oh, and since you're home, could you check on Grandpa's house? The realtor wants to list it next week, but we need someone to clear out the last of his things. The line went dead before I could respond. I stood in the middle of the terminal, surrounded by families embarking on their own vacations, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. Grandpa's house. The Victorian mansion on Maple Street where I'd spent countless afternoons in his study, watching him paint while he told stories about his travels. The house that had been filled with his art, paintings that my parents had quickly sold off after his death, calling them worthless hobby pieces. My phone buzzed with a text from Katie. Here's what you're missing. Face blowing a kiss. Attached was a photo of my parents and sister on the beach, golden sand and turquoise waves behind them. Perfect smiles, perfect tan lines, perfect family, minus the imperfect daughter. I shouldered my bag and headed for my car. Fine. If they wanted me to clear out Grandpa's house, I would. One last time in his study, surrounded by the lingering scent of oil paints and his favorite pipe tobacco. The drive to Maple Street was automatic, muscle memory from years of visits. The house looked exactly as it had 3 months ago, elegant, slightly weathered, with ivy climbing the red brick walls. My key still worked in the lock. Inside, the rooms echoed with emptiness. Most of the furniture was gone, sold off by my parents. But they hadn't touched his study yet. Too cluttered, Mom had said. We'll need a professional service. I pushed open the heavy oak door and for a moment I could almost pretend Grandpa was still there, sitting at his easel by the bay window. The room smelled of him, paint and tobacco and the leather of his old armchair. My fingers traced the spines of his art books, the ones Mom planned to donate. No one reads physical books anymore, honey. Something caught my eye, a gap between 2 volumes where there shouldn't be one. I'd helped Grandpa organize these shelves countless times. I knew every book's place. Pulling the books aside, I found a small leather-bound journal tucked behind them. It was locked, but I recognized it, Grandpa's personal diary. The one he'd always said contained his most valuable secrets. The key. Where would he have hidden the key? My eyes fell on his self-portrait hanging above the fireplace. The one painting my parents hadn't sold because the realtor said it added character to the room. In the painting, Grandpa sat at his easel wearing his favorite silver pocket watch. The watch. My birthday gift to him when I was 16, bought with savings from my first summer job. Mom had said they couldn't find it after he died. I scrambled onto a chair to take down the painting. There, taped to the back of the canvas, was the silver watch. And attached to its chain a tiny key. My hands trembled as I unlocked the journal. An envelope fell out, addressed to me in Grandpa's elegant handwriting. My dearest Olivia. If you're reading this, then you've remembered where to look for the important things. Good. You'll need that attention to detail for what comes next. Your parents never understood my art, just as they don't understand yours. They see the world in spreadsheets and status symbols. We see it in colors and possibilities. But I didn't just teach you about art, did I? I also taught you about planning ahead. The key to my safe is in the watch's inner compartment. Use it wisely. All my love, Grandpa Thomas. P.S. Check the newspapers from March 15, 1962. Some stories are worth more than others. I opened the watch carefully. Inside, behind the face, was another key, smaller, modern. But where was the safe? The answer hit me suddenly. March 15, 1962, Grandpa's first gallery showing. The day he sold his first painting. I went to his filing cabinet, the one Mom called that dusty old thing. Bottom drawer under press clippings. There it was, a yellowed newspaper featuring a young Thomas Harrison standing proudly beside his work. The painting in the photo hung above his desk. Or it had until last week. Mom had finally sold it, calling it just another landscape. But I remembered Grandpa telling me about that painting. Look closer, he'd said. Art isn't always what it seems. I examined the blank wall where the painting had hung. There, behind where the frame had been, a slight discoloration in the wallpaper. My heart pounding, I pressed the spot. A soft click and a panel swung open to reveal a wall safe. The key fit perfectly. Inside was another envelope, thicker than the first, and a USB drive labeled The Real Gallery. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Katie. Just booked a sunset cruise. Shame you're stuck at home with your paints. Artist palette face with tears of joy. I smiled, opening the envelope. Sometimes the best revenge wasn't about getting even. It was about proving them wrong in ways they never saw coming. And Grandpa, it seemed, had left me everything I needed to do exactly that. My hands shook as I spread the contents of Grandpa's envelope across his antique desk. Bank statements, gallery receipts, certificates of authenticity, and dozens of photographs spilled out, each one adding to a story that made my heart race faster. Oh, Grandpa, I whispered, picking up a photo of him standing in front of a gallery in Paris, dated 1985. You clever, clever man. My phone buzzed. Mom again. Don't forget to pack up those old paintings in the attic. The realtor says they're bringing down the property value. Just donate them somewhere. Those old paintings. I looked at the documentation in front of me. Photographs of every piece Grandpa had ever painted, along with their sale records and current locations. The USB drive contained even more. Digital scans, authentication papers, and most importantly, a detailed catalog of his entire collection, including the paintings my parents had sold off for pennies on the dollar after his death. I plugged the USB drive into my laptop and my jaw dropped. There were folders upon folders of information meticulously organized. But it was the video file labeled For Olivia that caught my attention. Grandpa's face filled my screen, his familiar smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. Hello, my dear, he began. If you're watching this, then you've found my safe, and more importantly, you've discovered what your parents never bothered to learn. That art has value beyond what you can see on the surface. He shifted, adjusting his signature bow tie. Your mother called my painting a hobby, your father dismissed it as a waste of time. They never knew that while they were pushing you towards sensible careers, I was building an empire. One painting at a time, one gallery at a time. My eyes widened as he explained. The worthless hobby pieces my parents had sold? All carefully crafted replicas. The originals were safely stored in climate-controlled vaults, their values increasing year after year. Check the folder marked Harrison Gallery Holdings. Grandpa continued. You'll find everything there. The corporation I established, the gallery partnerships, the international sales records. All managed through a private art investment firm in Geneva. I opened the folder with trembling fingers. Spreadsheets, contracts, and financial statements filled my screen. The numbers made me gasp. My phone buzzed again. Katie this time. Mom says to make sure you clear out Grandpa's art supplies too. No point keeping that junk. Artist palette prohibited. I smiled, thinking of the junk that was about to change everything. One more thing. Grandpa's voice drew my attention back to the video. Look in the folder marked Olivia's portfolio. Inside were high-resolution photos of every piece I'd ever shown him, from my first childish sketches to my recent works. Along with them, documentation showing he'd been quietly entering them in international competitions and galleries under a pseudonym. You have a gift, my dear, he said softly. One that your parents never understood. But the art world has noticed. Check your new email account. The details are in the envelope. I found the login information and accessed the account. Dozens of emails from galleries, collectors, and art publications filled the inbox. My work, published under the pseudonym O.H. Blake, had been gaining attention for months. Now, Grandpa's eyes twinkled with mischief. About that house they're so eager to sell? I pulled out the final document from the envelope. The actual deed to the Victorian mansion. The one that showed the house wasn't owned by Thomas Harrison personally, but by Harrison Gallery Holdings, the corporation whose ownership had transferred to me upon his death. My phone lit up with a text from Dad. Realtors coming Tuesday. Make sure everything's cleared out by then. I started laughing. The kind of deep, liberating laugh that comes when all the pieces finally fall into place. Opening my laptop, I began composing emails. One to Grandpa's art investment firm in Geneva, one to the galleries that had been inquiring about O.H. Blake's work, and one to Mr. Chin, Grandpa's longtime lawyer. Dear Mr. Chin, I wrote, I've found Grandpa's documents and would like to proceed with claiming my inheritance. Also, please inform the realtor that the house on Maple Street is no longer for sale. A notification popped up. Mom had posted another photo on social media. Perfect family vacation in paradise. Palm tree sparkles. The image showed them at a luau wearing matching Hawaiian shirts. I picked up one of the gallery receipts from Grandpa's desk. A recent sale of one of his worthless paintings had brought in more than their entire Hawaii vacation would cost. My phone rang, the investment firm in Geneva, responding to my email already. As I listened to them explain the extent of Grandpa's art empire, I opened the folder containing my own work. There, in a subfolder labeled Latest Acquisitions, was documentation showing that 3 of my paintings, ones my parents had mocked as amateur efforts, had sold at a prestigious London gallery for 6 figures each. Yes, I said into the phone, I'd like to schedule a meeting. And please prepare a complete valuation of the Harrison collection. My family should be back from Hawaii next week, and I have a feeling they'll want to discuss some changes. After hanging up, I walked around the study, running my hands over the books, the easel, the familiar furnishings they planned to sell off. This room had been my sanctuary, my inspiration, my connection to the one person who'd truly believed in me. Now it would become something more. The headquarters of Harrison Gallery Holdings under new management. My phone buzzed yet again. An email from one of the top galleries in New York, requesting a meeting with O.H. Blake to discuss a solo exhibition. I smiled, thinking of Mom's dismissive laughs, Dad's disapproving frowns, Katie's mocking emojis. They thought they'd left me behind to teach me a lesson about practical choices and sensible careers. Instead, they'd given me exactly what I needed. Time alone in Grandpa's study, where all his best secrets were hidden. Opening my sketchbook, I began planning my next piece. After all, the best art, like the best revenge, required careful composition, perfect timing and an eye for detail. Just as Grandpa had taught me. The morning my family returned from Hawaii, I was already waiting in Grandpa's study. Now my study. The room had been transformed. Professional gallery lighting illuminated selected paintings. A sleek laptop sat on the restored antique desk, and a projector was aimed at the cream-colored wall where Mom had planned to modernize with floral wallpaper. My phone buzzed. Pulling into driveway now, texted Mr. Chin. Your family seems surprised to see my car. I smiled, adjusting Grandpa's silver pocket watch on my wrist. Perfect timing as always. Olivia? Mom's voice echoed through the house. Why is Mr. Chen's car? And what happened to the for sale sign? In here, I called out, hearing multiple footsteps approach. They filed in, Mom, Dad and Katie, still tan from their vacation, wearing designer resort wear that probably cost more than they'd sold some of Grandpa's worthless paintings for. What's going on? Dad demanded, taking in the transformed room. And why is the realtor saying our listing was cancelled? Please sit down, I gestured to the arranged chairs. Mr. Chin will explain everything. The lawyer entered, carrying his briefcase. Ah, perfect. Everyone's here. Shall we begin? Begin what? Mom's voice had that sharp edge I knew so well. We have a house to sell and... Actually, I interrupted softly, you don't. Mr. Chin opened his briefcase, distributing documents. The house at 947 Maple Street is owned by Harrison Gallery Holdings, a corporation established by Thomas Harrison in 1985. Upon his death, ownership of this corporation transferred to his designated heir, Olivia Harrison. Silence fell as my family stared at the papers. That's impossible, Dad finally sputtered. The will clearly stated. The will you saw, Mr. Chin corrected, dealt only with Thomas's personal effects. The corporation, its assets, and its holdings were transferred through separate legal channels. I pressed a button on my laptop, and the projector sprang to life, displaying a slideshow of Grandpa's international gallery showings, sales records and asset valuations. Harrison Gallery Holdings, I explained, manages one of the largest private art collections in the country. Those hobby pieces you sold after Grandpa died? They were replicas. The originals are stored in a climate-controlled vault in Geneva, currently valued at approximately $48 million. Katie dropped her phone. Mom's perfect tan seemed to pale. But we sold. He stammered. Copies, I finished. Very good ones. Grandpa believed in protecting his investments. I clicked to the next slide. Speaking of investments, the screen filled with press coverage of O.H. Blake's recent gallery showings. Rising star in modern art, one headline declared. Blake's work sells for record prices, announced another. O.H. Blake, I said quietly, is me. Grandpa had been submitting my work to galleries for years. Those amateur paintings you mocked? They're now selling for 6 figures each. Dad stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. You can't just. Actually, she can, Mr. Chin interjected. And there's more. The trust fund you've been accessing for the past 3 months? It was a small account set up specifically to, shall we say, reveal true characters. I pulled out my phone, showing them Katie's text from their vacation. You left me behind to teach me a lesson about practical careers and sensible choices. But Grandpa taught me something more valuable. That true art, like true character, reveals itself over time. The house, the art collection, the gallery connections, all of it belongs to Olivia now, Mr. Chin confirmed. And given recent sales, the corporation's total value is approaching 9 figures. Mom sank into a chair. 9 figures. But that's not why I asked you here, I said, standing to pull down a cloth covering one wall. Behind it hung my latest work. A triptych of paintings. The first showed a family at an airport, one member conspicuously missing. The second depicted a study filled with hidden treasures. The third revealed a young artist emerging from shadows into light. This series, I announced, will be the centerpiece of my first solo exhibition at the Meridian Gallery in New York next month. They're calling it Legacy. The Meridian? Katie whispered. Even she knew that name. But that's one of the most prestigious galleries in the country, I finished. They're particularly interested in the story behind these pieces. About family, betrayal, and hidden truths. My phone buzzed, an email notification about another sale of my work. I let them see the price. You can't do this to us, Mom finally said. We're family. Family. I laughed softly. Like when you lied about the flight date. Or when you sold Grandpa's life work for pennies without even trying to understand its value. I touched the pocket watch on my wrist. You saw everything as worthless that you didn't understand. Grandpa saw the potential in what others overlooked. Mr. Chin cleared his throat. There are some additional matters to discuss, specifically about the unauthorized sale of corporate assets. Those replica paintings were still company property. Dad's face darkened. Now see here. The corporation is willing to forget about pressing charges. I cut in, on certain conditions. I laid out my terms. They would publicly acknowledge their error about Grandpa's art, attend my gallery opening in New York, and most importantly, stop trying to force their version of success onto my life. And if we refuse? Mom's voice was barely a whisper. Then Mr. Chin files charges for the illegal sale of corporate assets, and this becomes a very public legal battle. I gestured to my triptych. Either way, the story will be told. You just get to choose how it ends. They left an hour later, subdued and shell-shocked, clutching copies of the documents that proved everything. Katie lingered in the doorway. That painting, she said hesitantly, pointing to the third panel of my triptych. The light, it's beautiful. Thank you, I replied sincerely. You should come by the studio sometime. Really come by, not just to mock. She nodded slowly before following our parents out. After they left, I sat in Grandpa's old leather chair, my chair now, and opened his journal again. A loose page fell out, one I hadn't noticed before. My dearest Olivia, remember that art, like life, is about more than what others see on the surface. Your parents wanted you to follow their path. I'm giving you the tools to create your own. Use them wisely with creativity and compassion. Success isn't about proving others wrong. It's about proving yourself right. Love always, Grandpa. I smiled, touching the pocket watch he'd known I'd find. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the study in shades of gold and shadow. Perfect light for painting. Opening my sketchbook, I began working on a new piece. This one wouldn't be about betrayal or revenge. It would be about transformation, about hidden treasures revealed, about the legacies we choose to carry forward. After all, some things, like art, like truth, like vindication, were worth waiting for. And some lessons, like the ones Grandpa taught me, were priceless beyond measure. My phone buzzed one last time, a message from the Meridian Gallery. The waiting list for your opening night is over 200 people. The art world can't wait to meet O.H. Blake. I looked at my family's empty chairs, then at the triptych that told our story. Sometimes the best revenge wasn't about getting even. Sometimes it was about soaring so high that those who doubted you could only watch you rise. Just as Grandpa had planned all along. The manila envelope felt heavy in my hands as I walked out of Harrison and Associates law office into the crisp Colorado morning. Inside was the deed to what my family called the worthless piece of dirt, 500 acres of seemingly barren ranchland that had belonged to my grandfather. My sister Jessica's laughter echoed from inside, still celebrating her inheritance of our parents' $2.8 million estate. I'm Catherine Wells, and this is the story of how my family's greed taught me that true value isn't always visible on the surface. You can't be serious, Marcus. My mother's voice had risen to that shrill pitch I remembered from childhood disappointments. Catherine gets the old ranch? That property was supposed to be part of Jessica's inheritance. Marcus Harrison, our family lawyer for 30 years, had remained admirably calm as he read out the terms of my parents' living trust. They had decided to distribute their assets early, claiming they wanted to see their children flourish in life. What they really meant was they wanted to see Jessica flourish. I was just an inconvenient addition to the equation. The terms are quite clear, Margaret, Marcus had replied, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. The Mountain Creek Ranch goes to Catherine. It was a specific condition your father insisted on when he sold the property to you 10 years ago. It's in the original contract. My grandfather, Jack Wells, had been a mystery to most of the family. They saw him as a stubborn old rancher who refused to modernize or sell his land to developers. But to me, he was the only person who ever really saw me for who I was. You have his eyes, Katie, he used to say during our long walks around the ranch. Not just the color, you have his way of seeing what others miss. He was talking about his father, my great-grandfather Theodore Wells, who had first settled this land in 1923. Everyone thought he was crazy too, buying what looked like worthless scrubland. But Grandpa Jack had insisted on keeping it in the family, even when declining health forced him to sell to my parents. The last time I saw him alive, 3 months ago in the hospital, he'd insisted on speaking to me alone. His voice had been weak, but his grip on my hand was steel. The well, Katie, he'd whispered. Remember what I taught you about the old well? When the time comes, remember. I'd nodded, storing away his words like I'd stored away everything he'd ever taught me. 2 days later he was gone. This is ridiculous. Jessica's voice cut through my memories as she stalked across the parking lot, her Louboutin heels clicking on the asphalt. What are you going to do with a rundown ranch? You can barely keep your veterinary clinic afloat. That was Jessica, always going for the jugular. She wasn't wrong about the clinic's struggles. Opening my own practice in our small town of Silver Creek had been an uphill battle, especially with the new corporate veterinary chain that had opened up across town. I'll manage, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. I'd learned long ago that showing emotion around my family was like bleeding in shark-infested waters. Manage. She laughed, the sound sharp as breaking glass. You'll be bankrupt within a year. That land hasn't turned a profit in decades. But hey, her smile turned cruel, when you fail I'll be happy to take it off your hands. For a fair price, of course. Our parents caught up to us then. My father's face set in its usual expression of disappointment when he looked at me. Catherine, he began, using his CEO voice, the one that had built Wells Development into a regional powerhouse. Be reasonable. That ranch is a liability. The property taxes alone are my concern now, I cut in quietly. The deed's signed. The transfer is complete. You always were stubborn, my mother sighed, adjusting her Hermes scarf. Just like your grandfather. Look where it got him, dying in a county hospital instead of enjoying a comfortable retirement. I bit back the response I wanted to give, that Grandpa had died on his own terms, beloved by everyone in Silver Creek except his own family. Instead, I tucked the envelope into my worn leather messenger bag. If we're done here, I have patience to see. Patience, Jessica scoffed. You mean mangy farm dogs and half-dead barn cats? Really living the dream, aren't you, sis? I turned away, heading toward my muddy Ford F-150, another source of family embarrassment. Behind me, I could hear Jessica already making plans for the estate. The mansion will need updating, of course. That kitchen is so 2010. As I drove back to my clinic, my mind wandered to all the summers I'd spent at Mountain Creek Ranch. While Jessica was at tennis camp or European vacations, I was helping Grandpa with the horses, learning every inch of the property. He taught me things that seemed random at the time: the old boundary markers, the underground spring systems, the geology of the region. Knowledge is power, Katie, he'd say, but only if you know how to use it. The ranch house came into view as I crested the hill, weathered wood and faded paint, but still standing proud against the backdrop of the Rockies. I'd moved in 2 weeks ago after the initial paperwork was filed. My apartment above the clinic had never really felt like home anyway. Inside, I pulled out the box I'd been saving: Grandpa's old journals, maps and photographs. Things he'd insisted I keep safe over the years. On top was a yellowed envelope with my name on it, his handwriting shaky but determined. When the time comes, he'd said. I opened the envelope, unfolding pages of careful notes and hand-drawn maps. As I read, my hands began to shake. Suddenly, Jessica's mocking laughter didn't bother me anymore. Let them think I'd gotten the worthless piece of the inheritance. Let them think I was the family failure. Because Grandpa had known something they didn't. Something that would change everything. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I'd kept saved for just this moment. Dr. Rodriguez? This is Catherine Wells. Remember that geological survey you wanted to do on my grandfather's land? I think it's time we talked. Dr. Elena Rodriguez arrived at Mountain Creek Ranch early the next morning, her geological survey equipment packed carefully in her hybrid SUV. I watched her face as she reviewed Grandpa's notes, her eyes widening with each page. Catherine, if these readings are accurate. He paused, looking up at me. Your grandfather was sitting on something extraordinary. But why didn't he develop it himself? I smiled, remembering Grandpa's words. Timing, Katie. Sometimes the best hand isn't the one you're dealt, but the one you wait to play. Over the next 3 weeks, Elena and her team conducted detailed surveys of the property, focusing on the areas Grandpa had marked in his journals. Every evening I joined them after closing the clinic, learning about geological formations and underground reservoirs. Your grandfather was brilliant, Elena said one night as we reviewed the data. He didn't just find it, he mapped the entire system. These notes, they're decades of careful observation and analysis. I thought about the well Grandpa had mentioned in his final days. It wasn't on any official property maps, but I knew exactly where it was. He'd made sure of that. When can we confirm the findings? I asked. The initial tests will take about 2 weeks. But Catherine, Elena hesitated, this kind of project will need significant capital. The extraction technology alone. I know, I said quietly. I've been preparing for that too. What Elena didn't know was that I'd spent the last 3 months since Grandpa's death making my own preparations. The veterinary clinic wasn't just struggling because of competition. I'd been deliberately scaling back, referring complex cases to other practices, saving every penny. That evening I called Tom Chin, my best friend since veterinary school and now a successful investment banker in Denver. Katie, are you sure about this? Tom's voice crackled through the speaker. Taking out a loan that size against your clinic? I'm sure, Tom. I just need you to help me keep it quiet until everything's in place. Your family's going to find out eventually. Eventually, I agreed. But not until it's too late for them to interfere. The next few weeks fell into a careful routine. Clinic work during the day, geological surveys in the evening, and late nights poring over Grandpa's journals. He'd left me a roadmap, hidden in 30 years of careful observations and cryptic notes. But we weren't the only ones paying attention to the ranch. Had some interesting visitors today. Mike Thompson, my nearest neighbor, mentioned when I stopped by to treat his mare's infected hoof. Couple of suits from your sister's development company. Asking about water rights and property values. I kept my face neutral as I finished bandaging the hoof. What did you tell them? Mike grinned, his weathered face crinkling. Told him what your grandpa always said, this land ain't worth the taxes we pay on it. They seemed mighty pleased with that. Word traveled fast in small towns, and by the end of the week, I heard Jessica had been making calls to other local ranchers, testing the waters for potential land acquisitions. She's planning something big, Tom warned during one of our late-night strategy calls. Wells Development just registered 3 new subsidiary companies, all focused on resource management. Let her plan, I replied, looking at the preliminary test results Elena had sent over. She's looking in all the wrong places anyway. The pieces were falling into place, but I needed more time. Elena's team had confirmed Grandpa's discoveries, but we needed final proof, the kind that would stand up to corporate lawyers and government regulations. Then came the call I'd been dreading. "Catherine, darling," my mother's voice dripped with false concern. "We're worried about you spending all that time out there alone on that dreadful ranch. Your father and I think it's time to be practical. Jessica's company is prepared to make you a very generous offer." "I'm not interested in selling, Mom. Don't be ridiculous. That land hasn't been profitable in years. Jessica has plans to develop the entire valley. You're only hurting yourself by holding out." I thought about the well, about what lay beneath this worthless land, about Grandpa's patient waiting game. My answer is no. The pressure increased over the next week. Jessica sent her corporate lawyers with cease and desist letters, claiming some obscure clause in the original sale agreement. Dad showed up unannounced at the clinic, trying to bully me into seeing reason. Even some of my long-term clients suddenly started taking their business to the corporate vet chain. But I had something they didn't know about time. While they were trying to force me out, Elena's team was finishing their final analysis. Tom had the financing arranged through a discreet private equity firm. And most importantly, I had Grandpa's last gift, knowledge they didn't even know existed. 1 month after the inheritance meeting, I sat in my grandfather's old office, surrounded by his journals, and began making calls of my own. The first was to Marcus Harrison. "I need you to prepare some documents," I told him. "And Marcus? This stays between us. Just like you kept Grandpa's secrets." There was a long pause before he answered. "He always said you were the one who'd understand the true value of that land. The paperwork will be ready tomorrow." Next, I called Elena. "How soon can your team be ready to go public?" "The final tests came back this morning," she replied, excitement clear in her voice. "Catherine, it's even better than your grandfather predicted. With modern extraction techniques." "Good. Get everything ready. When my family makes their move, we'll need to move fast." The last call was to Tom. "Is the financing secured?" "Everything's in place. But Katie, are you sure you want to wait? If your sister's company files for development rights." "Let them file," I said, looking at the small model of an oil derrick Grandpa had kept on his desk, the one everyone thought was just a nostalgic decoration. "They're about to learn what Grandpa always said about patience." I hung up and walked out to the old well, the one that wasn't on any official maps. Beneath my feet lay one of the largest untapped natural gas deposits in Colorado, one that my grandfather had discovered decades ago but had kept secret, waiting for the right moment, the right technology, and the right person to develop it responsibly. Jessica thought she was going to turn the valley into another soulless development. My parents thought they were punishing me with a worthless inheritance. But in 1 week, when Wells Development filed their permit applications, they'd learn the truth. The mineral rights to the entire valley, secretly purchased by my grandfather over 30 years, had already been transferred to my name. Their development plans would be worthless without them. I pulled out my phone and opened the email from Elena's team. The subject line read, "Final analysis, Mountain Creek Basin natural gas deposit, estimated value, $2.1 billion. Let them think I was the family failure for 1 more week. Grandpa had waited 30 years for this moment. I could wait 7 more days. The morning of the Wells Development Board meeting dawned clear and cold. From my truck, I watched my sister stride into the company headquarters, designer briefcase in hand, confidence radiating from every expensive thread of her custom suit. Behind her, my parents walked with the easy assurance of people who thought they held all the cards. I checked my phone, 3 text messages. "Elena, all documents filed with the State Energy Commission. Waiting for your signal. Tom, private equity partners standing by. Green light whenever you're ready. Marcus, board meeting started. Timing is perfect." I smiled, thinking about the presentation Jessica was about to give. She'd spent weeks preparing it, mapping out her grand vision for developing Mountain Creek Valley into an exclusive resort community. My parents had been bragging about it at every social event in town, their brilliant daughter's billion-dollar vision. What they didn't know was that I had security clearance to the building. Dad had never bothered to revoke it after I'd disappointed him by becoming a veterinarian instead of joining the family business. I slipped in through a side entrance, nodding to Bill, the security guard who'd known me since childhood. "Good to see you, Miss Catherine," he said with a wink. He'd been one of Grandpa's closest friends. The executive boardroom was on the top floor. Through the glass walls, I could see Jessica at the podium, her presentation displayed on the massive screen behind her. The room was packed: board members, investors, local officials, even the mayor. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jessica's voice carried clearly through the door, "Wells Development is about to embark on our most ambitious project yet. The Mountain Creek Valley Resort will transform 5,000 acres of underutilized ranchland into Colorado's premier luxury destination." I waited in the shadows of the hallway, watching as she clicked through stunning architectural renderings of hotels, golf courses, and luxury homes. "Phase 1 will begin with the acquisition of the central property," she continued, pulling up a satellite view of my ranch. "Through strategic pressure and market devaluation, we've ensured the current owner will have no choice but to sell within the month." A few chuckles from the board members. My father beamed proudly. "The remaining properties will follow quickly. We've already secured preliminary agreements with most surrounding landowners." Another lie. I'd spent the last week visiting every rancher in the valley, sharing Grandpa's discovery. They'd all agreed to wait to let Jessica walk right into the trap she'd set for herself. Now for the financial projections. That was my cue. I pushed open the boardroom door. "Actually," I said clearly, my boots clicking on the polished floor, "I think we need to revise those numbers." The room fell silent. Jessica froze at the podium, her perfect composure cracking for just a moment. "Catherine," my father started to stand, "this is a private meeting dash." "Oh, I think I have every right to be here," I replied, pulling out my own flash drive. "Since you're discussing my property, I brought some relevant information to share." Before anyone could object, I plugged the drive into the presentation system. Elena's geological survey replaced Jessica's resort renderings. "What you're looking at," I continued, addressing the stunned board members, "is a comprehensive analysis of the Mountain Creek Basin natural gas deposit. Estimated value, $2.1 billion with current technology. And that's just the initial survey." "This is ridiculous," Jessica snapped, trying to regain control. "There's no gas deposit. The land has been surveyed dozens of times by surveyors who didn't know where to look," I cut in. "But Grandpa knew. He spent 30 years mapping it, waiting for extraction technology to advance enough to access it safely and sustainably." I clicked to the next slide. Mineral rights documentation. "He also spent those 30 years quietly buying up the mineral rights to the entire valley. Rights that he made sure were transferred to me, not the surface property owners. Rights that are now held by Mountain Creek Energy, my newly registered corporation." The boardroom erupted in chaos. Board members were frantically flipping through Jessica's proposal. Investors were making urgent phone calls, and my father, for the first time in my life, was speechless. "This is a trick," my mother finally managed, her voice shrill. "Jack would never dash." "Actually," Marcus Harrison's voice cut through the noise as he walked in, carrying a thick folder, "everything Catherine is saying is completely accurate. I have the original documentation right here, including Jack Wells's detailed explanations of his plans. He was quite thorough. As of this morning," I continued, "Mountain Creek Energy has filed all necessary permits with the State Energy Commission. We have partnership agreements with a major extraction company that specializes in environmentally responsible natural gas development. The financing is already secured." I turned to the board members, many of whom had known me since childhood, had watched my family dismiss and belittle me for years. "Wells Development can proceed with its resort plans, of course. But you'll need to negotiate mineral rights access with Mountain Creek Energy. Our geologists estimate the gas deposit extends under approximately 80% of your proposed development area." Jessica's face had turned an interesting shade of red. "You can't do this. The company has no claim to mineral rights it doesn't own," Marcus finished. "Catherine's ownership is legally ironclad. Jack made very sure of that." I walked to the window, looking out over the valley Grandpa had protected for so long. "I'm prepared to offer Wells Development a partnership agreement. fair market value for mineral rights access, plus a reasonable revenue share once extraction begins. The valley can support both controlled development and responsible resource extraction, if it's done right. The board members were already huddling, whispering urgently. Several were eyeing Jessica with expressions that suggested her future as CEO might be in doubt. "You planned this," my father finally said, comprehension dawning. "All of it. The struggling clinic, accepting the worthless ranch." "I learned from the best," I replied. Grandpa always said timing was everything. The next few hours were a blur of lawyers, negotiations and recriminations. Jessica stormed out at some point, followed by our mother. My father stayed, aging years as he watched his company's future shift dramatically. By evening, the preliminary agreement was drafted. Wells Development would scale back its resort plans to work around the extraction sites. Mountain Creek Energy would ensure minimal environmental impact and provide profit-sharing agreements with local landowners. As I drove back to the ranch that night, my phone buzzed with a text from Tom. Saw the stock market reaction. Wells Development up 23% on news of the gas deposit. Mountain Creek Energy's private equity valuation just hit $500 million. Not bad for a worthless inheritance. I parked by the old well, the one that had started it all. The night was clear, stars scattered across the Colorado sky like diamonds on velvet. Somewhere up there I thought Grandpa was smiling. 1 month later, I stood in my newly renovated veterinary clinic, paid for with the first round of investment capital. The corporate chain across town had mysteriously decided to relocate. On my desk sat a framed photo of Grandpa and me from my graduation day, his eyes twinkling with the same secret he'd kept for 30 years. Jessica had taken its sabbatical to Europe after the board voted to restructure the company's management. Mom still wasn't speaking to me, but Dad had started stopping by the ranch, asking questions about Grandpa's journals, perhaps finally understanding the man he'd dismissed for so long. The valley was changing, but carefully, thoughtfully. The natural gas extraction was proceeding under Elena's watchful eye, using the latest environmentally friendly techniques. The old ranches were staying intact, their owners now benefiting from both surface and mineral rights revenue. One evening, as I sat in Grandpa's old office reviewing geological reports, I found a letter I'd missed, tucked inside one of his journals. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded, but his words were clear. "Dear Katie, by the time you read this, you'll understand why I chose you to inherit the ranch. It wasn't just about the gas deposit, it was about finding someone who could see the true value of things. Someone who would protect this land and use its resources wisely. Your sister sees the surface, the quick profit, the easy win. You see deeper. You always have. That's why I knew you'd wait, plan, and do things right. I'm sorry for the hard years you'll face before this all comes to light. But some things, like the gas beneath this valley, take time to develop properly. Some people, like your family, take time to learn hard lessons. You're my greatest investment, Katie. The gas, the land, the mineral rights, they're just tools. The real inheritance is what you'll build with them. Take care of our valley. Love, Grandpa." I folded the letter carefully and looked out over the land that had caused so much drama in our family. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple. In the distance, I could see the lights of the first environmentally monitored extraction site, its presence carefully balanced with the natural beauty of the landscape. My phone buzzed. Another message from Jessica, the first since the board meeting. "Can we talk?" Perhaps it was time for healing, for building something new from the ashes of old resentments. After all, that's what Grandpa would have wanted. I texted back, "Come by the ranch tomorrow. There's something I want to show you." Sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying others. It's about proving them wrong so completely that they're forced to see their own mistakes. And sometimes, like the treasures hidden beneath seemingly worthless land, the greatest victories are the ones that take time to reveal themselves.